of the hour like this, but rather what is the actions to be observed by a Muslim. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that talked about things would happen, so what and how people should act as a result of these changes and these fitan. So since the Prophet ﷺ is the final messenger of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected his message, so no need for another prophet to come. He's the seal of the prophets. So he alayhi salatu wasalam is the prophet of this time. The time that we live in, who's the prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is sent to all mankind today is Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And before that, since he was sent alayhi salatu wasalam till the day of judgment. So till the day of judgment, the messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the messenger of Allah to all mankind. So his message is so comprehensive that the people of today, they are in need of it, and if he sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or they were present at his time, they would have the answers to their questions. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam addressed the entire ummah from the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam till the day of judgment, and this is the basics of our deen, the foundation of our deen, the entire deen of Al-Islam. 5 pillars of Al-Islam, 6 pillars of Al-Iman, the halal and the haram, all of that is at all times to be observed. There's no difference between time and another time. Everything has to be observed according to the way the Prophet ﷺ. But there are special things that the Prophet ﷺ said about towards the end of times, whether it's warnings on how to act in certain situations. And this is one of the miraculous things of the message of the Prophet ﷺ, perfect and comprehensive. And there are so many hadith in the subject, so just because of the time, we'll choose some of it to see that, what is related to us and how should we act, because for sure, definitely, we are in the time of towards the end of times. No one knows when is the hour, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even the angel that is responsible for blowing in the trumpet. He doesn't know when the hour will be established. And the first sign of the hour was the sent of the Prophet ﷺ as the messenger of Allah. So the signs of the hour doesn't mean that it means the hour is the next day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So, but there are signs, and this is what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in some of the hadith, but again specifically to the ones that is related to actions. One of the important hadith in this subject to show how this is a matter of belief, that how we believe towards this, and the Prophet ﷺ did not leave his ummah like this. It's not left for people to have opinions and likings, and you would find everybody talking about what should be done and what should not be done. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in the authentic hadith in Sahih, in Sunan ibn Majah and others, إِنَّهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ نَبِيٌّ قَبْلِي إلا كان حقا عليه أن يدل أمته على ما يعلمه خيرا لهم. There was no prophet before me unless it was upon him that he would guide his ummah to what he know of goodness for them. وينذرهم ما يعلمه شرا لهم, and he would warn them of every evil that he knows that they should avoid. وَإِنَّ أُمَّتَكُمْ هَذِهِ, and this ummah of yours, so this is for every prophet, this is aqeedah, this is a matter of belief. Every prophet was sent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him what's sufficient for his ummah of matters of good and matters of evil. The good for them to do and the evil for them to avoid. And the final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conveyed to him, and he revealed to him, and he ordered him to convey the perfect message to his ummah, which is all mankind, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ till the day of judgment, of every matter of goodness and every matter of evil to avoid. And that's also the meaning of another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, مَا مِن شَيْءٍ يُقَرِّبُكُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى إِلَّا وَقَدْ أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ. There is nothing that would get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless I commanded you to do. وَمَا مِن شَيْءٍ يُبْعِدُكُمْ عَنِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى إِلَّا وَقَدْ نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ. There's nothing that would get you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless I warned you from. So this is something that we have to have established in our heart. The deen is complete, right? Does it have to make sense to your senses, to your own reason as a one limited, deficient human being? It doesn't have to. This is wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ought to submit ourselves to it, but it's been perfected, and that requires ilm, requires knowledge, and for the person to seek the knowledge. So then he said عليه الصلاة والسلام وَإِنَّ أُمَّتَكُمْ هَذِهِ جُعِلَتْ عَافِيَتُهَا فِي أَوَّلِهَا. This ummah of yours, the afiyah, the strength of it has been made for this ummah in the beginning of it. The early generations of Islam. The first generations of Islam, the afiyah, the strength was in these times. وَإِنَّ آخِرَهُمْ, and آخِرَهُمْ, the last part of this ummah towards the end of times, يُصِيبُهُمْ بَلَاء. Bala, calamities, trials would afflict them. وَأُمُورٌ تُنْكِرُونَهَا, and matters, umur, تُنْكِرُونَهَا, that you would disapprove of, that you would find it not the same as it's supposed to be from the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sins, deviations, all kinds of things. ثم تجيء فتن يرقق بعضها بعضا. Then the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said, then fitan, tribulations, trials will come. يرقق بعضها بعضا. يرقق, that means one fitna makes the previous fitna looks small because it gets worse and worse. So every time a fitna comes, it makes the previous one, this was nothing compared to what is present now, and so on. يرقق بعضها بعضا. فيقول المؤمن, so the mu'min will say, هذه مهلكتي. This is what is going to destroy me, perish me, ruin me. ثم تنكشف. Then this fitna would be removed, lifted away. ثم تجيء فتنة, then another fitna would come. فيقول المؤمن هذه مهلكتي. Then when another one comes, the mu'min, the believer, would say, this is muhlikati, this is what would ruin me. ثم تنكشف. Then it will be relieved, removed away. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, فَمَنْ سَرَّهُ, this is the actions. This is the actions to be observed if these situations are present. And these actions are also for the early generations at all times. This is for all Muslims, but as you see the context of things. فَمَنْ سَرَّهُ, whoever is pleased, أَنْ يُزَحْزَحَ عَنِ النَّارِ, that he is to be pushed away from the fire. وَيُدْخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ, and for him to be admitted to Jannah. Because the fitan, we're not talking about physical matters that would afflict the people in this worldly life, loss of wealth necessarily. This is part of life. This is how things are. And if people are the healthiest and the wealthiest, eventually they would lose all of that and everybody will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what the danger of the fitan is that a person would lose his religion. And that's the worst thing that can happen to a person in this life. A person, to lose his deen, to not to fulfill the purpose of his life. And as always said, after 100 years from now, what matters to each and every one of us? Just 100 years, so that we make sure nobody is alive after 100 years, right? So after 100 years from now, what would matter to each and every one of us? Not the many things that we worry about today. What would matter is this statement, أن يزحزح عن النار ويدخل الجنة, that a person is pushed away from the fire and he's among the people of Jannah. This is what matters. And what matters then is what matters now. And in this dunya, this is the amal, this is the place of actions. In the hereafter, this is the recompense. But in this worldly life, what are the actions, what are the things to be observed and to be done so that the person is pushed away from the hellfire and to enter the Jannah. And towards the end of times, it's much, or the struggle is more. In a sense, even though in the early generations of Islam, and we saw how the companions, radiallahu anhum, they went through so much struggle. None of the ummah went through what they went through. But what is meant by this is the more the fitan comes, the more people would lose their religion. So, فَمَنْ سَرَّهُ أَنْ يُزَحْزَحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَيُدْخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ, whoever is pleased to be removed from the fire and to enter the Jannah, فَلْتُدْرِكْهُ مَوْتَتُهُ وَهُوَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. Then let him, his maut, his death, reach him while he is believing in Allah and the last day. So this is the matter of belief to be upon and to be strong. وَلْيَأْتِ إِلَى النَّاسِ, and let him يَأْتِ إِلَى النَّاسِ. When someone goes to the people, that means when a person meets or have a relationship with people, But the word وَلْيَأْتِ إِلَى النَّاسِ. You know, when, for example, we're sitting here in the masjid, you came to the masjid, I came to the masjid, we come to each other. When you meet someone, you come to see that brother, he comes to see you. It doesn't have to be coming back and forth, but it's basically the relationships, how to deal with people. وَلْيَأْتِ إِلَى النَّاسِ, so let him basically conduct himself with people الَّذِي يُحِبُّ أَنْ يَأْتُوا إِلَيْهِ, in a way that he would conduct himself the way that he would love for them to act towards him. And this is special, even though we know that it's part of al-iman. من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. As the hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, none of you shall believe till he love for his brother what he love for himself. This is part of al-iman. But specifically mentioned in this context with regards to the end of times and the tribulations and so on, as the ulama, they say, towards these times, it's more important to deal with the goodness and the high level of goodness and gentleness and good manners and so on, and forgiving and pardoning, than to seek justice and everything that you want your rights to be observed and things like this, because it's fitn, because things are confusing to many people. So you need to be gentle with them, with one another, so that people, you don't help the shaitan on them to lose their religion, but rather to be more lenient. And that's why, as many of the ulama, this is the time of rifq, the time of gentleness, not the time of disputes and war among the people, one after the other over things, but rather to be lenient, but without, of course, compromising the deen, because many people, because of the fitn, they slip away. So the person has to have that gentleness and to treat the people the way that you would love for them to treat you. And the second part with regards to the fitn, the tribulations that is among the Muslims themselves. وَمَنْ بَايَعَ إِمَامًا فَأَعْطَاهُ صَفْقَةَ يَمِينِهِ وَثَمَرَةَ قَلْبِهِ فَلْيُطِعْهُ مَا اسْتَطَاعَ فَإِنْ جَاءَ آخَرُ يُنَازِعُهُ فَاضْرِبُوا عُنُقَ الْآخَرِ. This is the end of the hadith. That means if the people, they give the pledge to an imam, to their leader, then they should obey him to the best of their ability. And if someone come else to try to yunazi'uhu, to overthrow the other one, then to kill the second one. This is for the people of authority. This is from a siyasa shar'iyya. This is not for the individuals. So, but again, here, this is with regards to the bloodshed. And that's why many of the hadith of the fitn with the bloodshed is to avoid the bloodshed and to stay away from this. And to be careful even with the word of mouth, that a person might help for fitn to be established among the believers and things like this. So, but the point of the hadith here is that this deen has been completed, and the Prophet ﷺ taught his ummah every matter. There is also, when it comes to, not with a specific particular priority in some orders, but to just to give an example of some of these hadith that show some actions to be observed. So we get to know here that a person, one of the things to be observed is that a person would deal with people the way that he would love for them to deal with him. So if you like for people to forgive you if you make a mistake, forgive them. If you like for people to treat you kindly, treat them kindly. And this is, everyone would like for people to treat them this way, instead of, again, being so particular in every matter of what's my right and justice and why would he say this to me. Especially when we talk, we don't have to analyze the entire world. We're talking about our own selves, like a community like this, Muslims together, in one masjid. Right? Why did this brother say this? Why didn't he reply to my salam the way that I expect him to do so? Or one masjid versus another masjid. And people would have all kinds of disputes of, many times it's of no basis to it whatsoever. Again, with the criteria, of course, of being upon the truth and not compromising the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to have that leniency and the goodness, where the goal, of course, is to observe the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the hadith was related to the masajid, that the Prophet ﷺ said about something that was not happening at this time, something that will happen later, and telling the people what to do in these situations while it's being explained. He says, and this hadith in the Silsila Sahih, it's an authentic hadith, the Prophet, hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he said, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سيكون في آخر الزمان. It will be in آخر الزمان, towards the end of time. قوم, people, يجلسون في المساجد حلقا حلقا. People will sit in the masajid, in the houses of Allah, circles, circles. حلقا حلقا. إمامهم الدنيا. Their imam is the dunya. What leads them is the dunya, is the worldly matters. And in some of the narrations, ذكرهم الدنيا وحب الدنيا. They only mention the dunya and the love of this worldly life. The masajid is built for what? For the dhikr of Allah, for the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remember the hereafter. And in the masajid, when we make our salah, the words that we say in our salah, this is the main job to be done in the masjid. And then when we recite the Quran, when we learn the deen of Allah, we learn what's in the Quran and what's in the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Even if what's in the Quran and the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, it's about actions to be done in this dunya, in this life. But to be doing acts of ubudiyyah to Allah, acts of worship of Allah, seeking the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. So even the majalis of al-fiqh in talking about transactions, buying and selling, what's halal and what's haram and markets and so on, this is majalis al-akhirah. This is gatherings of the hereafter. This is not gatherings of this dunya, even though it's all about money, contracts, what's in the contracts, things like this, but this is deen. To do what is halal and to avoid of what is haram. So if it's something like this and teaching the text of the deen of Islam, this is majalis al-akhirah. But what is meant with that, as we know, is when the masajid is not for the deen. It's only for the dunya and the worldly benefits and socializing and having fun. And actually we're living in a time, and we should not be negative, and if we should be lenient and so on. But you would find sometimes, and I saw that with my own eyes, inviting people to the masjid, the first point that was mentioned in the ad, to have fun. And then third or fourth point, to learn and they think that this is da'wah. We just need to get the people, get them to have fun, and then, no, the masajid is not for this. The masajid is for the deen of Allah to be established. And the leniency and the goodness doesn't have to be like this. So again, this is, and of course it doesn't mean that it's not permissible to talk about matters of dunya in the masjid. It is permissible. But when we say it's permissible, that means there's a need for it. So if there's a need for it, a person would do it. But what's the main job to be done in the masajid? Is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to learn the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to occupy the masajid with this. And yes, it's permissible, but when the hadith mentions this, as if this is the norm, and the people become, this is, as the hadith says, imamuhum ad-dunya, their imam is the dunya, things like this. So to act is to bring back the masajid the way it was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ used to deal in the masjid with all matters, disputes and affairs of the people, and they would even remember the days of Jahiliyyah and things like this. But what is the norm of the actions done in the masajid? The salah and the Quran and the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the main things in the masajid. And the other things also, as part of the masjid, is the center of all things for the believers. Also, so this is, as you see, it's not something that the Prophet ﷺ witnessed. It's something that is going to happen later. So to warn the people from such a thing. Another example, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, يأتي على الناس زمان. A time will come for the people. ما يبالي الرجل من أين أصاب المال من حلال أو حرام. And this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. A time would come, ما يبالي الرجل. The man would not really care from where did he receive the money, whether it's from halal or haram. He doesn't really care. So this is a time would come when a person, and of course a Muslim, for a Muslim, the halal and the haram is not something that he doesn't really focus and doesn't really care. He is extremely careful. And when we talk about being extreme, we should not be extreme. But when it comes to money and where your money come from, the word extreme is always a negative word. But we have to be very extreme when it comes to earnings. Is our earnings halal or not? And that's why, as mentioned before, it's not about haram and halal only, that you leave the doubtful ones, so that you save yourself from getting closer to the haram. It becomes difficult towards the end of time, be patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Razzaq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. We have to have the yaqeen and the certainty, and people should help one another in this matter and seek in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted, and that requires also knowledge. And if a person has a dire need or so, and he is seeking a verdict in his situation, he should ask the one that he trusts his knowledge and his religion for a particular example and a reason. And this requires definitely not just any knowledge, but someone that is well established in knowledge. But again, what's the hadith? So what's the hadith is leading us in what action? That we should go against this. A person should care. He should not be among those who they don't really care, as long as it's a good job. Right? يأتي على الناس زمان ما يبالي الرجل من أين أصاب المال من حلال أو حرام. Some of these hadith, it doesn't necessarily talks about something negative. It can be a norm or something that happens. It's not necessarily something bad. One of which, and the ulama, they mentioned this example of this hadith from the signs of the hour, that it's not necessarily something haram. But it can give a negative meaning to it if it takes the person away from being upon the purpose of one's life and to be in ghafla and forgetfulness. One of which is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ بَيْنَ يَدَيِ السَّاعَةِ one before the hour happens, taslimul khassa, which is a negative thing. Taslimul khassa means what? Only those who know each other, they would give salam. The salam is not widespread. And of course the salam is between the Muslims towards one another. So a Muslim would see a Muslim, I don't know this person, so why would I give him salam? And you would see that even in the Muslim world. It's happening, right? And that's a very simple matter. When you're passing by people, you say salam to them, whether you know them or you don't know them. Sometimes some people would say, what is he making salam? What do he want from us? Does he want something? Or this is something that is beyond this? It doesn't matter what they think. Eventually they would realize that it's just, spreading the salam, since one of the rulings of the salam is ifsha' salam. It's not about giving salam, it's spreading the salam. And spreading that dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would bestow safety and peace among the people that you're giving salam to. And also, in the same narration, وَفُشُوُّ التِّجَارَةِ فُشُوُّ التِّجَارَةِ Ifsha' salam is spreading. Here, فُشُوُّ التِّجَارَةِ trade becomes so widespread, very widespread. And this is a very obvious thing. You might be, which is not permissible, by the way, in the masjid. If you have your phone and you're making deals, it's haram in the masjid. And this is something that can be applied to the previous hadith. It's haram to buy and sell in the masjid. And with the ease of things now, say for example, you're sitting now, I forgot I wanted to order something online. Can you do that while you're sitting in the masjid? No, it's not permissible. Because it's forbidden to buy and sell in the masjid. It doesn't have to be physical markets established in the masjid. Anything that is done virtually, the same rulings apply if it's physically done, as the ulama they say. So, but it shows again for fushuw al-tijara. Fushuw al-tijara not necessarily a bad thing. So for the tijara or the trade to be widespread in itself is not haram, it's okay. But a person has to be careful not to be taken away by this and to neglect the responsibilities and the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rights of others and so on. But fushuw al-tijara, as the Prophet ﷺ said, حتى تعين المرأة زوجها على التجارة, to the extent of which it becomes so widespread, to the extent of which that the woman would help her husband in matters of at-tijara, matters of trade. So you would find the whole family businesses, and the wife is helping. Again, is that permissible or not permissible? It's permissible. There's nothing haram in this, right? So don't take from this that it's haram. And this is again an example that the ulama they mentioned from the signs of the hour, that it's not haram. It's not something bad, but to be careful, to be watchful of yourself, so that these types of things does not take you away from the main thing in your life. So for example, the wife helping her husband for tijara, mashallah, is good, making sure that everything is halal. But then her salah, how is her salah at home? How is her adhkar? How is her word of the Quran? How is her obedience to her husband and living a family life the way it was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the husband also with his rights to be observed and things like this. And the narration continues with qat' al-arham, which is haram, of course, severing the relationship of the kin and kith, wa shahadat az-zur, the false testimony, to lie in one's testifying in front of a judge or so, which is one of the destructive of sins. وكتمان شهادة الحق, and to conceal the witness of the truth. وظهور القلم, another one that is not bad in principle, which is al-qalam is the pen. Zuhur becomes apparent. The qalam, everybody's writing. The writing is so widespread. So this is, again, nothing wrong with that, but to be careful what you're writing, right? Because if once something which is okay, which is permissible, becomes so widespread, that means there has to be something wrong that happens as a result of that. One of which is when you start speaking. Like, for example, here I'm speaking, right? كثرة الكلام. If you speak too much, what's going to happen? You're more likely to make mistakes. You're more likely to commit sins. If you sit in a gathering and people start talking for a long time, a ghiba would come, backbiting, something would slip. If they speak less, then the less chances for them to commit sins. Does that mean that a person would say, don't talk too much because it's haram? No, it's not haram in itself, but be careful, because this can get you closer to slipping away and making something haram. So the same thing, whether a person writes something or shares something or copy and paste something, we are responsible for every action that we do. So this is some of these narrations, one of which also, what time do we have? We still have some time. 10 minutes? Time. There's another thing with regards to the heart. We mentioned this hadith before, and it's one of the hadith that also requires actions and for us to purify our hearts by being very close to the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The hadith, and it's an authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا يأتين على الناس زمان. A time will come unto the people. قلوبهم قلوب الأعاجم. Their hearts is like the hearts of the A'ajim. And the A'ajim is, in this context, Al-Ajami is the non-Arab speaker. This is literally what it comes from. But in this context refers to the disbelievers. So the hearts of the people will be like the hearts of the disbelievers. حب الدنيا, the love of this dunya, the love of this worldly life. سنتهم سنة الأعراب ما أتاهم من رزق جعلوه في الحيوان يرون الجهاد ضرا والزكاة مغرما. And their way is like the way of the Bedouins. Whatever comes from rizq, they would put it in the animals. Means what comes goes like this. يرون الجهاد ضررا, they see al-jihad harmful thing. والزكاة مغرما, and al-zakah is a penalty, in which the zakah is supposed to be something given with goodness. But the first part of the hadith is the hearts become similar, which of course it shows that the hearts of the believers should be completely different. The hearts of the believers has al-iman in it. They believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He's the only one worthy of worship, the rububiyyah of Allah, His names and attributes, and the pillars of al-iman, and the hereafter. Just the subject of al-iman makes the heart completely different, and of course it's different. But then, as a result of this matters of belief, and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the fear of Allah, and the hope for the rewards from Allah, and so on, and the actions has to be accordingly. So to be warned against these matters. Also one of, there's so many again of these things, and these hadith, and the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, when some of the Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, when they went to him and they were complaining to him about what they are facing from Al-Hajjaj, and Hajjaj was very tyrant in the way that he would kill and so on. So Anas and some of the Sahaba were still alive. And they went to him, what to do with him, how to deal with such a tyrant. He said, Isbiru. He would say to them, Isbiru, be patient. فإنه لا يأتي عليكم زمان إلا الذي بعده أشر منه حتى تلقوا ربكم سمعته من نبيكم صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, be patient, because indeed there's no time would come unless the time after it is much more evil than the previous one, till you meet your Lord. He said, I heard this from your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the meaning of this hadith with other hadith that shows of the virtue of some of the times towards the end of times. To bring these meanings together, that means, as the ulama, they say, in general, Not in every matter. In general, when you zoom out, right? This is how things are, yes. But in some pockets, some places, sometimes even, things can be much better than the previous times. No doubt about this. So, but in general, this is how things are. And he commended them to be patient. One of the hadith also that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, many hadith refers to the relationship between the people and the people of authority and how to be patient and not to overthrow and not to do all these types of things that cause us fitan. And we mentioned some of it before. One of the hadith which is very famous, and you probably heard it before, the hadith of Musnad Imam Ahmad and others, he said, سَيَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ سَنَوَاتٌ خَدَّعَتْ. And this is something that we can relate to. And we have to be careful also with the hadith that talks about things in the future. We should not rush into interpreting it, but rather to seek the knowledge from the people of knowledge and to be more focused on the actions. And the actions are always going to be, even if what's being mentioned is not there yet, the actions would still be valid and would be good. A time would come where, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, سَنَوَاتٌ خَدَّعَتْ. Sanawat, years, that is khadda'at. Al-khida' is one, means deception, deceiving years. People will be deceived. You know, and when someone is deceived, that means the truth is not clear, the falsehood is not clear. When you go deceive someone, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from deceiving or being deceived. When someone deceives someone trying to sell a piece of glass as if it's a diamond, right? So he would say, this is diamond, but it's a piece of glass, deceiving him. So years, the time becomes, people are in deception, living in deception. What's the characteristics of that? يُصَدَّقُ فِيهَا الْكَاذِبُ وَيُكَذَّبُ فِيهَا الصَّادِقُ. The liar will be called truthful. They would take the words of the liar as the truth. And as-sadiq, the truthful one, they would call him a liar. So this is the worst deception that can happen to people. When the one speaking the truth, people would say that he's a liar. And the one that lies, people would say that this is saying the truth. And this is something that makes things very confusing to the people. وَيُؤْتَمَنُ فِيهَا الْخَائِنُ. And the betrayal one will be trusted. Someone that betrays the people, he will be trusted to a position, to whatever entrusted that he's entrusted with. And he is kha'in, he is a criminal, he is someone that betrays the people. He's not a trustworthy person to be responsible for whatever is needed to be observed. وَيُخَوَّنُ فِيهَا الْأَمِينُ. And the trustworthy will be called a betrayal. So this is how it becomes very confusing. وَيَنْتِقُ فِيهَا الرُّوَيْبِضَةُ. And the ruwaybidah will speak out at this time. So they said to the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا الرُّوَيْبِضَةُ. What is al-ruwaybidah? The Prophet ﷺ defined al-ruwaybidah by saying, الرجل التافه الرجل التافه يتكلم في أمر العامة. What's التافه? The insignificant person, the one that has no value whatsoever. The man that is tafih. At-tafih is someone of no value whatsoever, someone that is ignorant, doesn't know anything about anything. He speaks about the affairs of the ummah, speaks about the affairs of the masses, right? And do we have any more explanation than what we see today? Everybody has the ability to speak. And not just that, we're in times where everybody is asked to speak about the affairs of the ummah, right? And if you don't, you're betraying the ummah. It's okay to be silent. This is actually what a person should be. We should leave the matters of the ummah to the people, those who are not ignorant about the matters, but rather for the people of knowledge, for the people of understanding, and so on. But every person has an opinion about the entire ummah. This is one of the signs of the hour. A person would say, but we have to be engaged, and we have to be this. Engaged based on what? Based on ignorance or based on knowledge? And what is meant by being engaged? And what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question the person when it comes to his individual responsibility. And the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're supposed to be observing and the obedience of Allah. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially whatever a person has means. If a person doesn't have means, then to act and to conduct oneself in the proper way. But to have an opinion about every matter and to be able to sit relaxing and analyzing the entire world like this at ease, when the person is misinformed and he is manipulated and he's being deceived and he thinks that he can analyze the entire world in just in a very simple manner. So plus this can lead oneself or others astray. That's why at times of things that are confusing or things that are not clear, of course things that are clear, person should take the means, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and these means has to be something, of course, that is halal. So the الرجل التافه يتكلم في أمر العامة. You would find people that have no significance whatsoever and giving advices to the ummah and what should people do and things like this when they have no ability and no means for it whatsoever. One last narration, inshallah ta'ala, that we also mentioned before, but this is also again to give us, if we get from this, is that the deen is complete, and you would find for every matter till the end of times the guidance from the Quran and from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but we need to seek that, of course, definitely from the people of knowledge. This is a statement from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. We talked about this narration recently. He said, he was addressing the tabi'een by saying, إِنَّكُمْ أَصْبَحْتُمْ فِي زَمَانٍ كَثِيرٌ فُقَهَاؤُهُ قَلِيلٌ خُطَبَاؤُهُ. And the like of this, he would have to have heard it from the Prophet ﷺ. This does not come with ra'i or opinions. He says that you are now in a time, this is the time of afiyah, the time of strength, the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. كَثِيرٌ فُقَهَاؤُ. The fuqaha, the ulama, refers to the people of knowledge are many. قَلِيلٌ خُطَبَاؤُ. The khutaba, those who are eloquent in speech and firing speeches and motivating the people and so on, they are less. More ulama and less khutaba. Of course, every masjid has to have a khatib. The khutbatul jumu'ah is a must. But what is meant by qalin khutaba'u with regards to those who would give firing speeches and things like this, and anyone can give khutbah, it doesn't have to be a alim. So before we continue, not every khatib is alim. And we see that clearly if the imam doesn't come to give a khutbah, someone has to lead the salah. Salatul Jumu'ah is fard. So sometimes anyone can be a khutbah. Then people, if they like the khutbah, then he's the alim of the time. And if he gets more views, then he's definitely the alim of, and people would follow him and whatever. And then he will be asked to give fatwas. And then all of that, what is the criteria? What is the thing that, because he gives a good khutbah, a good speech, that makes people cry, that makes the heart become soft. MashaAllah, this is good. And these types of individuals, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, without knowledge, the Salaf used to warn against them. And they would give them the title Al-Qassasun, the storytellers. Right? They give stories, but they don't authentically make sure that what they're saying is authentic anyway. And the goal is to make the heart softened or make the people cry. This is the goal. Let's soften the hearts of the people. Let's get the people to be motivated. What's the content of speech? It doesn't matter. So whether it's fabricated lies, not authentic opinions, all kinds of stories, things like this, just to get the people thinking that this is a good thing. People would love the deen, would come closer to the deen. But the matter, this is ilm, this is a matter of wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, this is how the time of the companions radiallahu anhu. قَلِيلٌ سُؤَالُهُ كَثِيرٌ مُعْطُوهُ. At their time, قَلِيلٌ سُؤَالُهُ. Those who ask are less. Those who ask from others for money or things like this are less. كَثِيرٌ مُعْطُوهُ. Those who would give are more. So at the time of the Sahaba Tabi'een, those who would give are more than those who ask. And those who would give are more happier with the fact that someone would come and ask. They used to enjoy having someone to ask. Why? Because this is a way for them to give their charity, knowing that this is going to go in the right place. العمل فيه خير من العلم. Still continuing talking about the early generations. العمل فيه, actions in it is better than the knowledge. So the knowledge was not just information, it was knowledge for them to act upon. And that's what al-ilm is. When we keep on talking about al-ilm, knowledge, what is knowledge? In the deen of al-Islam is not information as mentioned before, but rather it's al-amal. It's the actions but based on ilm. So if it's ilm, knowledge without actions, it's not called ilm. It's called something else. Person has lots of information, mashallah. But he's not a alim. The alim, the one that has the knowledge, is the one that fears Allah, the one that worships Allah, the one that is obedient to Allah. His actions basically translating what he has of ilm. And then, وَسَيَأْتِي زَمَانٍ. Then the time will come. All of what's mentioned before will be flipped the other way. قَلِيلٌ فُقَهَاءُ كَثِيرٌ خُطَبَاءُ. Less fuqaha, less ulama, and more khutaba. And the khutaba would lead the people. This is fitn. Once the khutaba are the ones that leading the ummah, then the ummah is in danger. Even if they look and they speak nice and everything. And the ulama are in the back burner, if it's correct to say. Or not even like that. Ulama are looked down upon. Or they don't know anything. They only know how to make your salah and this like that, but they don't know the reality of the people. And you would find these people saying, we don't need the ulama. We already know the reality of what we're facing. And the guy just got a degree, graduated, and degrees does not make a person a alim. Right? The word alim, yes, it's have different context and different languages. So when you have someone graduated with an alim degree, religiously, and this is linguistically, in some cultures, that's fine for people to agree upon that this is called something, like bachelor's degree, this is what the degree is called. But religiously, in the Quran and the Sunnah, the word alim and ilm, it is not attained by a degree. It does not come by a degree. Right? It comes with life occupied with knowledge, and with that is the amal, is the actions that comes with it, and the ulama are nasab, the ulama are lineage to another. But this is a different subject. But here, so the time would come, less ulama, abundance in khutaba, and again, what we witness and what our job is, we need to follow the ulama, not the khutaba, not those who are khutaba, but rather the ulama. وَكَثِيرٌ سُؤَالُ. And lots of people that would ask, قَلِيلٌ مُعْطُوء, less people are giving. So the opposite of what's mentioned before. That means greed is more, and more people are not just in need, but because the person, if he has weakness in his religion, he would find himself at ease asking. Because to have iffa and to have honor and dignity, that requires strong iman. العلم فيه خير من العمل. Al-ilm fi, knowledge in these later times will be better than actions. Al-ilm here, what is the meaning of al-ilm? Information. Knowledge of the deen. But to acquire the knowledge. But where is the actions? It's separated from the actions. You'd find the person having knowledge, but the actions is not with it. So he has even PhDs in Sharia and so on, but then his way is not the way the Prophet ﷺ. What's the benefit of that? This is ruining himself more than anything else. And this is something that we should question ourselves first and foremost. So as you see, the actions here that required is to follow the way of the time of the strength of this ummah, the early generations of Islam. And this is part of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected the deen. There is nothing that we need to be warned against unless you would find it in the text, in the traditions of this ummah, in the Quran, in the Sunnah, in the statements of the Sahaba, in the Tabi'een. And this is something that is perfecting this ummah till the Day of Judgment. And that's why if we get from this or from some of these narrations that things are negative, no, actually not, because there's many hadith that talks about those who would steadfast upon the deen of Allah. And the rewards in the later times of the ummah is far more than the rewards in the early times of the ummah. And one of the evidence of that is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said that سَيَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٍ الْقَابِضُ فِي عَلَى دِينِهِ كَالْقَابِضُ عَلى جَمْرَةٍ مِّن نَّارٍ. That a time would come when those who hold fast to the religion is like holding fast on a hot coal. أَجْرُ الْوَاحِدِ مِنْهُمْ كَخَمْسِينَ مِنْكُمْ. The reward of one of them is equal to 50 among you, meaning the companions radiallahu anhu. So when things, and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned what makes the reward is so much and multiplied, he said to the companions, إِنَّكُمْ تَجِدُونَ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ أَعْوَانًا. You, meaning the companions, you find helpers for you to do good, but they don't. So this is the criteria. If you find yourself, you don't find too much help to do good deeds. You don't find too much help to be obedient to Allah, but rather you would find all kinds of help for you to be disobedient to Allah. If you are in such an environment, you find yourself or a person is diligent and steadfast upon the deen of Allah, the reward is multiplied, then a person would never wish to be in any time except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him in, because He's the most merciful, the most wise subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's the most just subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the entire thing is about acting and being firm upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have good expectations of Allah, and to seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is definitely from the bisharat, from the glad tidings for the ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam to be firm upon the deen. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. بارك الله فيك. Oh, 5 minutes? So if you have any questions? Any questions? تفضل. Family gatherings. Mixed family gatherings. The ruling of mixed family gatherings. What is meant by mixed family gatherings, of course, it doesn't mean the husband and the wife and the children, because that's mixed. That's halal. That's fine. The same thing with the relatives that are blood relatives that are maharim. It's okay for them to mix. So you have the grandfathers and above, and the grandsons and daughters, and the uncles and the aunts and so on. But then, and this is according to the deen of Allah. So therefore, this requires ilm. So anything that is, or anyone that is not a mahram, and what's mixed is not men together or women together, this is obvious. But when men and women get together, either it's permissible for them to be together and see each other, maharim, or they are not maharim to one another. And if not, then they should not be sitting together in a gathering that sins will be committed, right? Because people say sometimes funny things. People are in the streets, then they go to the store, and in the Kaaba they're making tawaf, right? This is the norm of things in the streets and things like this. And a person should lower their gaze and so on. But you sit in a place, people are sitting together, looking at each other, speaking to each other, sins are committed, so this is not something that is permissible. And if we imagine, which is something that can never be attained, but if you, for the sake of arguments, people are together like this, but everybody's lowering their gaze, and women are not softening their voice, and they only talk in whatever there is need, but this is not the case. So therefore, you would find sins being observed, and just the fact that they're not supposed to be mixed is not just about the sins. The mixing itself, we have text, we have nusus that forbid this. And we talked about that recently also in the masajid, which is a very obvious thing, which is clear and agreed upon and no differences of opinion. Women are separated from men. Why do we have in the masjid men here and the women, whether they are in a different place or so? Because this is what the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ were upon. They were not mixing in the masjid. And the masjid is the purest place on earth. If someone has bad intentions and so on, it's not going to be the masjid at least. But in the purest places, this is how things are. So you can imagine then at home or family gatherings or so on. And when the Prophet ﷺ went outside of the masjid and he saw the men and women gathered, or mixed, not gathered, but they went out of the masjid and they're mixed in the road. So he addressed the woman and he said, لَيْسَ لَكُنَّ وَسْطَ الطَّرِيقِ. You have no rights to be in the middle of the road, stay on the side of the road, so that he would separate them from the men. And many narrations like this. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us. Now, with regards to spreading the salam, does it have to be shaking the hands? Shaking the hands is not something necessarily associated always with giving salam. This is something separate. So giving salam is sufficient to say assalamu alaikum. But shaking the hands is a good thing if people are on a personal situation. Not, for example, if someone walks into the masjid now and he says salamu alaikum to those who are next to him without raising the voice, this is what's sufficient. And not to come and give salam to each and everyone sitting like this. This is not the proper way of doing this. But if it's a one-to-one meeting or someone, you counted people, and they say and they make musafaha, that's part of the sunnah, and the sins are wiped away as a result of that. But if they don't make shaking hands, Saying the salam by itself, this is what is meant by ifsha is salam. By spreading the salam is just saying salam to the people when a person passed by them. Is it for both men and women? There's details of this, of course, and the ulama, they mentioned it. Of course, also the maharim, yes. But can a man give salam to a strange woman or group of women or the opposite? The thing that governs this is anything that leads to fitna or any sins that might or might not happen, then this is something to be avoided completely. So that's why they would, for example, they say if in some situations where a big alim, for example, and group of women are passing and they said salam and he's old in age and they said salam, no harm. There's no fitna in there. But a young man and a young woman saying salam to each other, even if it's in the store, Shaitan has his way of doing things. Oh, how did she reply the salam? Oh, mashallah, that means she maybe likes me or whatever. So this is something to be avoided. Whenever there's any signs of fitna, is to avoid the salam. If there's no signs of fitna, in principle, it's something that is permissible. Sometimes it's for the person not to be scared in situations where, for example, if I'm just making up something, if a woman, for example, in a place where she's worried about something and someone passes by and says salam so that she would be in state of comfort, there's no harm in this, inshallah ta'ala. But in general, to avoid the fitna, this is what is meant by this, inshallah. But the food is here, so we'll stop here, inshallah. Still waiting? Any more? What is it? Or for Lombard, where they sell out working for them in IT department. In the what department? In IT department. In IT department. See, there's working in the IT department for places where they sell haram, like liquor or mortgage companies and things like this, and banks. When it comes to working in something haram, if something that is forbidden, either a person is working directly dealing with the haram, which is of course obvious that it's haram. And when it comes to riba, when it comes to wine and intoxications, these specifically two things, the Prophet ﷺ and the Hadith cursed, which shows that it's haram, not just the one that actually doing the transaction, but like 9 individuals. لَعْنَ اللَّهُ آكِلْ الرِّبَى وَمُوكِلَهُ, the one that takes the riba, the one that gives the riba, كَاتِبَةً, the one that writes it, شَاهِدَيْهِ, those who witness the contract. Right? Not just the ones that are dealing with it. And the same thing with the wine, he is cursed the one that drinks it, the one that the wine is given to, the one that is carrying it, the one that is squeezing it, working in manufacturing. So you would find anything that leads to it. So whether it's directly dealing with it, it's haram, of course. And then the general rule, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Help one another in matters of righteousness and goodness, and do not help one another in matters of sins and transgression. So if someone is committing sin, it is not permissible to help that person or to help the institutions or whatever to establish the sin. So then if it's in whatever is in haram, anything that is helping the haram to be established, then it's not permissible. And this is the general ruling in it, unless it's a very specific work that has nothing to do with the haram whatsoever. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy, and this is part of, again, being patient with the orders of Allah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, inshallah. Now. Right. The question of the masajid, like you would find Islamic centers or the masjid and the school and a hall and things like this, is it all masjid or it's separate? These matters are to be related to the urf or the norm or what people perceive things. So it's a beautiful thing, mashallah. If you have a masjid and a school next to the masjid and a gym next to the masjid, all of this is beautiful, mashallah. And it's best to be built separate, so that people know that they are in the masjid, they're not in something else. Because what's in the ahkam, the rulings of the masjid is different. It's haram to buy and sell, for example, things like this. So when everything is within the same place, then they have to be patient with the ahkam, the rulings of the masjid. It's nothing wrong with having a school in the masjid, no problem, but then we have to observe the ahkam, the rulings of the masjid. So it depends on the place. And it's one roof that brings it all together, then it's to be a masjid. And you cannot say, for example, in a room like this, you cannot say, well, this first 4 rows will have it a masjid. And the last few rows is not masjid. There's no such a thing. It's all masjid, right? So you cannot make a decision that this room is going to masjid, unless when you're building, it's the urf, meaning that when someone sees it, he would see that this is a masjid and this is something else. Not that you decided when you're building that this room is a masjid and this room is not a masjid. That's why the room of the imam, for example, it's to the rules of the masjid are to be applied in it if it's attached to the masjid. You cannot say this is my room. So things like this. So that's why building the masjid is important, to observe these matters. And if it's already under one roof, then a person should be careful because of the rulings of the masjid. Yes, it's a masjid. Right. It's a masjid now. The what? Yes. Right. Inshallah, we'll talk about that in details also, but when it comes to like in Halloween and things like this, which is a pagan holiday and it's not permissible for a Muslim, of course, to observe. But the question is some of the masajid to take people away or the youth away, and that night they have a special gathering or maybe durus or something and bonfire, things like this. This is not permissible to give any special attention to any night or any day whatsoever, even with good intentions. And once this is established, 1 year after the other, it becomes part of the norm. It's just to be treated like a normal day, and people should not give it any special attention to it. Otherwise, it becomes part of even of the deen. So people would ask each other, what are you doing in Halloween? I'm going to the masjid, because we have some special occasion. No, you're going to pray Salatul Isha, Salatul Maghrib, but not to have a special occasion for this. Wallahu musta'an. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.